I want to start with an ayah of the Quran. And I think it's an important one to start with, especially because we're talking about rahmah, with starting with those who are closest to us. We know the narration of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ where he says that like the best of you are best to their families, right? The best of you are best to their families, and I am the best to my family. And in another one, it's the best of you are best to their wives, and I'm the best to my wives. So it's the closest relationship that we have with others is actually the spouse. Okay, because even the word that's used for the spouse is libas, right? A libas is directly next to you, and this idea that your most beautiful behavior should come out to those who are closest to you. That's what we hope, and that's what we pray for. That's what we aim for. It's very easy to be kind and friendly and forgiving to strangers that you're only going to see once, and it's like they're just short interactions in a grocery store, in an airport, and even at work. But to have beautiful, good, the best of your behavior towards those who are closest to you, that's really an indication of faith. When it comes to forgiveness as well, being able to practice forgiveness with those who are closest to us. Forgiveness is a branch of love. Forgiveness, it's an act of mercy. It's an act of charity. You can call it a charity of the heart. But it's a branch of mahabba. Okay, so we would say, like the way of the family of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is love and service. And a branch of love is to be able to forgive. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said that we don't truly believe until we love for our brother what we love for ourselves, right? For your brother, your sister, that's what you love for yourself. So the default setting for Muslims when it comes to each other is that we should be a people of mahabba, a people who love one another, a people who want for each other what we want for ourselves, a people who have this like goodwill, this altruistic goodwill towards one another. And mahabba can have many different manifestations, many different love languages and ways that it shows up. But forgiveness is one of the ways that mahabba shows up in the lives of those who are closest to us. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Yusuf, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن من أزواجكم وأولادكم عدوا لكم فاحذروهم وإن تعفوا وتصفحوا وتغفروا فإن الله غفور رحيم. O believers, indeed some of your spouses and children are enemies to you. So beware of them, or be cautious of them. Ihdar is like be cautious. But if you pardon, and the word that's used is ta'fu, and overlook, tasfahu, and forgive, وَتَغْفِرُ, then Allah is for Himself to us forgiving, the all forgiving and the most merciful. So there's here an indication that from those who are closest to us, which are our spouses, those who are closest to us, our children, right? And the word is not that they are your enemies. It's inna min azwajikum, okay? So this from or among means that it's not necessarily that some spouses are enemies and some spouses are not enemies. It can mean that among the times that we're interacting with our family, there's going to be situations where they don't necessarily steer us in the best way. And the tafsir of this is actually connected to a situation where there were certain families from the people of Mecca that were believing families, and the wives prevented their husbands from making the hijrah with those who made the hijrah. And they said, you know what, let's let them go first, and then we'll wait, and then we'll go later. And then those husbands, they actually wanted to make the hijrah with the believers together in that same famous event, but they listened to their wives in that situation, and then they realized later on there was so much spiritual merit and fadl and benefit for the people who made the hijrah at that particular time. And so they regretted it and they wanted to be angry. And then this ayah is revealed to say, okay, like they didn't steer you right. But at the same time, if you, on this thing that was very dear to them, because they wanted to be as close to the Prophet Muhammad as possible, and they wanted to have these merits that everyone else enjoyed. It says, if you pardon and overlook and forgive their fault. So Allah is encouraging these people in this situation to say, okay, like what they encourage you to do was not what was best for your deen in that moment. It doesn't mean they're your enemies for life. In that moment, min, so it's from. And the only, the word adu in the Quran, it usually refers to shaitan. Okay, so the shaitan is your enemy, so take him as your enemy. So what ends up happening, especially in family relationships that are good family relationships, is shaitan will try to interfere and try to uh, create all kinds of problems. And we know that, from the hadith literature, that the shaitan is most pleased. He's the most pleased when he can cause a rift between spouses. That's when he feels like he won, and that's like that's his crowning, achievement, as if he can create problems in marriages. Because we are people who believe in families, and the strength of our community actually comes from the strength of the families within our community. So he can break the family, and then he can break the strength that we have as an ummah. So know that that's like a target area that he loves. And so in those situations, right, there's satanic interference, right? And we are people who have to also be cautious of recognizing when that is happening in our family, and acting accordingly in order to, inshallah, prevent anything from escalating into worse. Know how to de-escalate, and especially when things start off as a tiff, as like a small thing, it can either get a lot worse or it can get a lot better. And it does take two to tango. And again, I'm not right now, again, another disclaimer, I'm not speaking about situations of extreme abuse and things like that you would go to you need to get out. The person might need to go to jail or prison because they're actually a criminal. We're talking about like just everyday Muslim life, and the things that can come up that can create suffering out of something that should just be a moment of pain, something that could have, or we would dealt with in a better way, with the way of ihsan, could be something much smaller, and but yet it becomes a mountain out of something that could have just remained a molehill. And as many of our teachers say, that the way of ihsan actually takes mountains and turns them into molehills, right? And it like deflates, it takes all the air out of the the conflict and the drama and the fitna that wants to come. The way of ihsan actually like removes that. And so the word ta'fu, it indicates excusing and pardoning and overlooking. It's like erasing the situation. Now, that's one way of forgiving, is the person that has done something that is upsetting. You overlook it, you pardon it, and you might even forgive it to the extent that it's like, okay, it's as if they didn't do it. And that's a really great level. That's a great level of forgiveness. The word tasfahu, right? The root of that is the same as the word sahifa or suhuf, which is like a page. Suhuf is scriptures, right? And as it's described, suhuf Ibrahim wa Musa. So it's and it's like turning over. So it's very much like turning the page. So this incident took place. You could analyze it to death. You could, overdo, like beat a dead horse, and the lessons are, clear, and like you're not going to go anywhere if that's where the focus remains. But turning the page is kind of like, okay, something took place that wasn't right. We acknowledge that it wasn't right, and forgiveness is sought, and people want to try again, and they want to start over. And giving people the opportunity to start over, it means turning the page. Okay. Now, what's the opposite of that is remembering every single incident. 20 times a person has done something and someone else has memorized, like they're the angel that's sitting on the left shoulder who's recording 20 incidences, right, that have recorded, and never letting that person actually move on, because it's like, I have my record against you. And that person may really deeply want to change, and that person may deeply want to be a different person and start again. But if you hold them to who they were, and you hold them to what they did, and you never let them escape those memories, how are you ever going to give them the chance to become someone different, right? Now, does that mean that we get bit by the same hole twice? Because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us the believer does not get bitten by the same, or stung by the same hole twice. No, that's not what it means. And we're gonna get to that in a second. But tasfahu is the ability to turn the page. Now, something that's helps with the ability to turn the page is some kind of you could say offense takes place and conditions are set. Okay, we're not, in order to make sure this never takes place again, we're going to do this and this and this. And the person agrees, and now you have new conditions. It's not the same hole anymore, right? Because this person has an agreement, they've sought forgiveness, and they're going to move on. And so they turn the page. And you're able to turn the page because you're like, we've pivoted. We're not starting from the same place. And I think this is one of the things that can often happen in relationships where a person, receives a lot of harm, and they never get to the place where they're able to say, I don't want this harm to happen again in this way, whether it's like language that's used that's demeaning or harmful. They never have the conversation that mediates and says, we need to have a different engagement, and we need to make conditions to meet that different engagement so that there's a way to move forward. There's actually a way to turn the page and start over again, fresh. So tasfahu is a big deal, and getting to the point where you can actually turn the page is a process. وَالتَّغْفِرُ, and to forgive the faults. So forgiveness is, in your heart, there's no remaining malice towards the other person. There's no remaining, you don't wish ill on them. You don't wish harm on them. You don't want them to be dishonored. You're not seeking revenge. In front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you've said, like in true forgiveness, is that I have given up my claim against them on Yawm al-Qiyamah, right? Like I am asking that you're praying to Allah to forgive them, and you're also having, forgiven them yourself, and you don't want them to be punished on your account. So that's a high level of, forgiveness. You could say that this is mentioned in ascending order. You start off with pardoning and overlooking. Okay, ma'alish, we'll move on. Tasfahu, okay, now we have to be able to turn the page. And then taghfiru, okay, it's not in my heart. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And we do this because we seek the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need His forgiveness, and we need His mercy. And so to practice mercy and forgiveness is a door of receiving it from Allah, right? The Prophet Muhammad said, "Man la yarham la yurham." The one who doesn't show mercy is not shown mercy. And so the purpose of it is not necessarily because someone deserves it or doesn't deserve it. That's not why I forgive. I don't even, analyze whether or not they deserve it or don't deserve it. What I look to is, I know that Allah loves it when I forgive, so He's the reason that I'm going to forgive. Now, what forgiveness looks like, again, is important to also explain. But I want to first just read just a few verses of the Quran, just to show us, just to remind us as an ummah that forgiveness is an ethic in Islam. It's an actual thing we're supposed to do. We are to be a forgiving people. We are to be a merciful people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Ali Imran, and hasten towards forgiveness from your Lord in a paradise as vast as the heavens and the earth, prepared for those mindful of Allah. They are those who donate in prosperity and adversity, control their anger, and pardon others. And Allah loves the good doers. And Surah An-Nisa, whether you reveal or conceal a good, or pardon in evil, surely Allah is ever pardoning, most capable. And Surah Ash-Shura, and whoever endures patiently and forgives, surely this is a resolve to aspire to. It's something it's an ambition. I want to get to a place where I can forgive. It's maybe I'm not there in this moment, depending on what the harm was, but it is a goal. As a believer, it is one of my goals, because it's part of the path of mahabbah. In Surah At-Taghabun, but if you pardon, overlook, and forgive their faults, then Allah is truly forgiving, most merciful. Actually, this is part of what I just mentioned. And Surah An-Nur, and this is, subhanAllah, this incident is famous in the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and it was revealed because of this incident where Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha was being slandered, as we know, and Abu Bakr Siddiq was financially supporting a relative of his that he found out later on was part of the people spreading the slander. And so he didn't explode at him. He didn't do anything unbecoming. The only thing he did was he stopped his financial support. He stopped his donation to the person who slandered his daughter that was a relative. And these verses are revealed in Surah An-Nur. In verse 22, do not let the people of virtue and affluence among you swear to suspend donations to their relatives, the needy, and the immigrants in the cause of Allah. Let them pardon and forgive. Do you not love to be forgiven by Allah? And Allah is all forgiving, most merciful. So for Abu Bakr Siddiq, his motivation now to pardon and forgive is centered in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you not love that Allah forgives you and pardon you? Then do that to others, right? And this is very much part of, or in line with the famous instruction of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, تَخَلَّقُوا بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ, to take on the divine characteristics of God, mercy and forgiveness being one of the most important. In Surah Yusuf, when the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam, they admitted, by Allah, Allah has truly preferred you over us, and we have surely been sinful. So we know what happened with Yusuf alayhi salam. He's thrown, his brothers leave him for dead, right? He's thrown into the bottom of a well. He gets sold into slavery. All kinds of issues happen. He gets imprisoned for a number of years. We know the story, but it's like, if there is a traumatic story in a family that you can reflect on in the Quran, it's the story of what the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam did to the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. And so when Yusuf alayhi salam is now in the Emir of Egypt, right? He and his brothers come to him and they realize who he is. And his brothers in that moment, they recognize not just who he is in terms of he's better than them and his khuluq and all these things, but like they realize like Allah has given you something that he did not give us. And they're in a state of acceptance for that. By Allah, Allah has truly preferred you over us, and we have surely been sinful. Okay, so they're admitting their fault. So the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, he says, there is no blame on you today. May Allah forgive you. He is the most merciful of the merciful. And so, forgive me, I think earlier I mentioned this was the surah, the ayah of about the family being, from your family being enemies, is actually in Surah Al-Ghabun. This was the citation I had for Surah Yusuf. So in this particular point, Yusuf alayhi salam tells them there's no revenge after everything he's been through. And he could have, and he had the power and the ability to use his political prestige and power to throw them into prison, let them taste a little bit of what they put him through. But he didn't do that. And he says, there is no blame on you today. And a lot of times when people are in conflict, like a big part of what they really want is for someone else to hold the blame. Like, you need to hold the blame. You need to like claim the fault, own the fault. And he's saying, on this day, there's no blame on you. So he's even alleviating them from that. And given everything. Now, yes, have they apologized? They have apologized. But his response to their apology is not to dig it in harder. Many times, one of the reasons why people have a hard time apologizing and seeking forgiveness is because the one they're coming to say that to just digs it in harder, rather than to receive it with mercy and to say, thank you for the apology. Thank you for acknowledging that. And it's inshallah, we're going to try again, or we're going to amend this situation. They dig it in harder. And many times parents do this to their children. A child comes to say, I'm sorry, I messed up. And the parent, rather than saying thank you for the apology and embracing them in that, they might spend the next hour continuously berating them for how badly they messed up and how it's not really something they can come back from. And it's really in being treated in that unmerciful way that people learn from the time they're kids that they're not allowed to mess up, and that no one else is allowed to mess up either with them. And it like creates that perpetual cycle of a lack of mercy and a hard heart. Now, what's interesting is that there's a number of narrations that actually speak to when someone comes to you and apologizes, if you don't accept their apology, the blame is on you. The blame is not on them. If you don't accept their apology, there's one narration that says you will not drink from the hawd, from the spring of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ on the Day of Judgment. When everyone else gets to drink, you will not be able to drink because when someone came and apologized, you didn't accept it. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ mentions in a number of ahadith in relation to forgiving others. Abu Hurairah narrated, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "Charity does not decrease wealth. No one forgives, but Allah increases him in honor, and no one humbles himself before Allah, but Allah raises him in status." In another narration in Ahmad, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "There is no man who suffers an injury to his body, then he forgives the one who caused it as an act of charity, but Allah will absolve his sins commensurate with the extent of his charity." In another narration by Ahmad, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "Show mercy and you will be shown mercy. Forgive and Allah will forgive you." In Bukhari and Muslim, right, when the slander took place and the verse was revealed, when Abu Bakr radhiallahu anhu heard the verses, he said, "Yes, indeed, by Allah, I would like Allah to forgive me." And so he resumed spending on his relative as he used to, and he said, "By Allah, I shall never deprive him of it." And that's why he's Siddiq, because as soon as the truth becomes manifest to him, he's the first to follow it. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is reported to have said, "One whose brother comes to him, shirking the responsibility of a sin against him, he should accept his excuse, regardless of whether he is truthful or lying." This is really important. Meaning, like, sometimes a person comes and apologizes and they make an excuse and it comes off as an apology, like a fake apology, like they don't really mean it, or it comes off as like the way they're saying it doesn't really sound genuine. And he says he should accept his excuses regardless of whether he is truthful or lying. If he does not, he shall not come to the fountain. This is in Tirmidhi. And Ibn Asakir reported also, when Sa'd passed by Abu Sufyan with the banner of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ on the day Mecca was liberated, he announced, "O Abu Sufyan, today is a day of slaughter. Today the unlawful will become lawful. Today Allah will disgrace the Quraysh." So the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, "O Abu Sufyan, today is a day of mercy. Today Allah will honor the Quraysh." This is amazing. No one would have faulted the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in history for punishing the Quraysh in Fath Mecca for the bloodshed of the Muslims for years and years and years, for the boycott that they had put them through. How many lives were lost? How many, they betrayed their treaties. No one in history would have faulted him for putting the people of Quraysh to task and holding them accountable, imprisoning their leaders, whatever the case may be. But the Prophet Muhammad chose something that was much higher. And so he says, "O Abu Sufyan, today is a day of mercy. Today Allah will honor the Quraysh." And so this is something that, it's the way of the Prophet ﷺ to practice mercy. It's the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to practice forgiveness. And how do we reconcile this with Sharia, with law, with fiqh, with accountability, with hisab? It's a balanced system. But it also requires us to have the wisdom to know what to do when and how. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was sitting with a group of companions in the masjid, and he said, "A man will now enter who is from the people of paradise." And the companion walked in, and later it happened again, and then a third time. So everyone saw exactly who this person is. He's an unnamed companion. So Abdullah bin Amr ibn al-As is the one who wanted to know what's so special about this man. And we know the famous story that he comes to the man and he says, "I had a conflict with my dad, and so I need a place to stay. Can I stay with you for a few nights?" The man says, "Yes, you can stay in my home." He stays with this man. He doesn't notice anything special or different about him than the other companions. And he asks the man, "Actually, I need to just level with you. I need to be honest. I didn't have a problem with my dad, but the Prophet Muhammad said this about you, and I'm trying to observe what's different about you, and I haven't seen anything different. So can you tell me if there's something different about you? Can you tell me what it is?" So the man couldn't think of anything, which, by the way, just that by itself shows you the humility of his companion. The man couldn't think of anything that would set him apart from anyone else. Why the Prophet Muhammad would describe him like this. So this virtue that he had, he didn't see himself in having this virtue. It's not like he's thinking, what I do is I'm a special person because I forgive people every night. No, not basking in his own greatness at all. When the question comes to him, he can't think of what it might be. But maybe he's thinking it's okay, like he was with him, he saw the prayer, he saw the fasting, he saw whatever he saw from the man on an outward level. So he thinks about what goes on that you can't necessarily see on the outside, but that's also happening. And so he says, after a bit, he said, every night before I go to sleep, I forgive whoever has wronged me. I remove any bad feelings towards anyone from my heart. In another narration, I don't have any jealousy towards anyone for any good that they have. So this narration is in Ahmad, and also the narration in Ahmad adds that Abdullah then said, this is what was conveyed about you, for we have been unable to do so. So what I also really appreciate about this narration is that Abdullah bin Amr ibn al-As doesn't just hear this from the man and say, okay, that's easy, we can all do it. He doesn't say that's not really that big of a deal. We can all just go to sleep and clean our hearts towards everyone. He says that's what it is. That's the thing that the rest of us have a hard time doing. Okay? People might not have a hard time praying tahajjud. They might not have a hard time reading lots of Quran. They might not have a hard time giving a lot of money in charity. They might not have a hard time in a lot of different acts of ibadah, but they may have a really hard time just letting things go and forgiving people and turning the page and just being able to practice that level of compassion where they have nothing in their heart against anyone. That is, it's a quality of a sound heart. And may Allah help us to be people who, again, in terms of something to aspire to, is we seek to have a sound heart. We may not have it right now. We may be in a difficult situation, but it's part of the destination that we're trying to come to. Ibn Abbas reported that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, verily Allah Almighty is magnanimous and He loves magnanimity. He loves the highest morals and He detests pettiness. So sometimes, honestly, the situation that happens when we're talking about mercy and forgiveness is, I didn't like the way she looked at me. I don't like, how everyone, it could come from hasad, it could come from jealousy, which is its own sin. We're not talking about major harms and abuses. We're literally in many community scenarios where there's microaggressions that are happening between people that in reality, we can let those things go. We can forgive them and let them go and move on and set a better precedent and kind of like behave in a way that is its own example without telling people to do anything else. Anas ibn Malik reported that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, none of you will have faith until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. And part of this is that would we not love for our own selves to be forgiven if we make mistakes with others, right? If we have hurt someone else in some way, don't we want to be forgiven by them? Or do we want them to hold a grudge until Yawm al-Qiyamah and hold us accountable on Yawm al-Qiyamah? So this concept of I don't want anyone to hold a grudge towards me, so I'm not going to do that towards anyone else. This is why it's part of the door of mahabbah. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said to his companions, shall I tell you something that will make your palaces in paradise higher and that would raise you in degrees? They said, yes. He replied, to be forgiving and to control oneself in the face of someone who provokes you, to forgive a person who was unfair or unjust to you, to give someone in need who did not give you when you were in need, and to keep contact with someone even though they did not reciprocate it. This is ihsan. This is, I will not treat you according to how you treat me. I will treat you according to what Allah loves. And not just what's good. What does He love most? And usually that's the hardest path. All right. The path of ihsan is not the easiest one. We have the sharia, we have the law, we have the lowest common denominator. You can take people to court. You can do all kinds of things. But the path of ihsan is always the hardest path. It's not an easy one to take. But its rewards are so great. And the purpose of taking it is Allah. There's no one else. And we are the ones who benefit from it the most. Just like when we give charity to others who are in need, yes, we help them, alhamdulillah, but the charity that we give, it benefits us much more than it benefited the ones we gave it to. We are more in need of giving than they are in need of receiving. All right, our soul is in need of that generosity. And they're the ones who gave us the opportunity to practice that generosity. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, people are created in different degrees. People who are who slowly get angry and they forgive fast. People who get angry quickly and forgive quickly. People who are slow to get angry and slow to forgive. And people who get angry quickly and slowly forgive. Okay, 4 different categories. Then he said, the best of those people are those in the first category, and the worst belongs to the last category. So what's the best category? You're slow to get upset and you're fast to forgive. That's the best. The worst is to get angry fast automatically and to take a long time to forgive. That's the worst category. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, do not cut yourself off from one another. Do not turn your backs on each other. Do not hate each other. Do not be jealous of each other, and be servants of God as brothers. Right? And so part of it is that, like, when we think about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, does he want his ummah to get along? Does he want us, the families of his ummah, to get along? Would he be happy if he saw us involved in fitna and drama and slandering each other and backbiting and holding grudges and not forgiving? Or would he be happy from us if we are brothers, as he commanded us to be, and people who try to reconcile, try to forgive? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ asked his companions, do you know who are the most evil amongst people? And they replied, no, do tell us. He said, the person who stays by himself all the time, a person who physically punishes his slave, and a person who withholds help when his brothers are in need. So this is the worst of people. Then he said, should I tell you about someone who is even more evil than that? And they replied, yes. He said, a person who hates people and who is hated by people. Then he said, should I tell you about someone who is even more evil than that? And they replied, yes. And he said, those who do not accept the apology. Those who do not accept the apology. From the beautiful names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that should inspire us, as his beautiful name, Ar-Rahim, Al-Afu, Al-Ghafur, Al-Sabur, Al-Halim, Al-Wadud, Al-Salam, Al-Latif. How many of them indicate to us the kind of character that we ourselves want to practice and what we want Allah to be towards us, how we want him to treat us, right? And this is, in English, the most merciful, the ultimate pardoner, the most forgiving, the most patient, the most forbearing, the most loving, the source of perfect peace, the most gentle and subtle. You know, so these are beautiful names of Allah that we get to practice when we are seeking to have ihsan with each other in our relationships and in healing wounds. Now, in terms of steps, these steps were, subhanAllah, there was a program that one of our dear sisters and teachers and scholars, Dr. Maryam Shaybani, did, which for those who are interested, you can go and sign up directly on her website for women. She did a women's class on this subject in great detail. And subhanAllah, at the same time that she was doing her project, I had for my own studies, I had a separate project related to mercy and forgiveness. And I saw that we had so much overlap in our what we had found, because our tradition is the same tradition. All right, it's the same tradition. And so if we use our tradition to help navigate what we're going through, we're going to head together, inshallah, in the same direction. But if we're relying on everything outside our tradition, and that's why I don't like a lot of the language that's often used, because it can derail people from the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And it can make people who are actually really good people think that they're dumb and stupid and bad. I remember a sister telling me once that everyone tells her that she's a doormat because she forgives people easily. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's, you forgive people, but do you let them continue to harm you? And she said, no, I adjust what's going on, but I just continue to have a relationship with them and try to continue a friendship with them. And I couldn't help but respond and say, like, that's ihsan. You're not a doormat. That's the Prophet ﷺ described the highest palaces of paradise for people like who can have this magnanimity in their spirit to forgive people who act towards them in an unjust way. So just beware of the social messaging. Sometimes people are spiritually much stronger than we think they are, and they have capacity to be magnanimous and wise at the same time. So look to what our tradition says, and look to what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did. So the first thing in terms of like actual forgiveness is, it's important to not bypass a harm when it's happened. And what do I mean by that? It was nothing, it wasn't bad. And the person, they think that they've forgiven, but in reality, their heart is filled with so much pain from whatever has taken place that that they've only like bypassed it. A term that's often used is spiritual bypassing, but really it's like a state of denial where a person outwardly thinks it's forgiven, but the grudge is alive and well in their heart, and the pain is alive and well inside of them. And so if a person can actually acknowledge those feelings and how it made them, what came up for them as they were feeling that way, and see if they can let go of those feelings and forgive that person and overlook what happened, if they can do that on their own, khair wa barakah, right? Alhamdulillah, they're able to remove it from their heart. Their heart is clear now. They can, and it, they can continue. Now, someone else tries to do that and they're stuck and they're like, I cannot get rid of this. This is here and I'm trying to get rid of it and I'm praying for it to be gone and I can't, I don't know what to do. When the person has met their own incapacity to let it go, that might be a really good time. And I would say that's a very good time to seek pastoral care, depending on the level of the harm, or if it's actually trauma-based, to go and get therapy from someone who is specialized in the kind of trauma that they went through. And ideally, someone who is practicing Islamically integrated or Islamic psychology versus just what's out there right now, because it's hit or miss. I know many, many stories in our community of people who have gotten help outside the Muslim community and they have felt like a huge gap in cultural understanding, religious understanding. They actually felt judged in the therapeutic encounter instead of healing. And so, so ideally you find a wonderful practitioner who has integrated our tradition with the therapeutic process. And alhamdulillah, we have institutions like Khalil Center, we have Maristan, we have Forward to Health, we have Cambridge Islamic College has their Islamic psychology program, so we're probably going to have a lot more programs and initiatives that are going to be in the community that we can look to for help when it comes to, okay, how do I not just move past this trauma, because it's going to need more than like thinking about it on your own, but how do I actually get the help so that that I do this in a healthy way, that I can actually let go and not spiritually bypass what's happened, but also there's likely other kinds of help that the person needs at that point, if it's been something that's related to heavy abuse or traumatic situations. Also, I just want to say, the word trauma has been overused in our time. And if someone's ever gone through an actual traumatic situation, it is so offensive to them for people to use it lightly for things that are actually not traumatic. Okay, so when someone goes and they have a negative encounter at like a board meeting or a masjid experience, but it's something that left a bad flavor in their mouth, but did not cause dysfunction in their life. It does not actually create this like stuck state for them spiritually, emotionally, all of those things. It was just literally a bad encounter. And then for people to describe, again, the regular day in and day out ups and downs that we might have with each other when we step on each other's toes, we should not use the word trauma when it comes to that. It's very offensive to people who have actually been traumatized. And so I don't want to make light of that term at all. And that's why, again, the disclaimer is that we're going to talk about steps to healing this, and we're going to talk about direction. But, the healing is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and many things are a process. Some things can come to some people quickly, and that's a mercy from Allah. And some things can come to people over a period of time. And the timing is with Him. So the second thing is that when we are seeking to forgive, we're not forgiving them because they deserve it. So every time a person wants it to forgive, and then it's like, yeah, but they did this. Okay, you're still thinking about them. They're your motivator. That's, that person is becoming your cause of behavior. Do we not have anyone who's a greater cause of behavior than the person who's provoking us? And that's Allah. Allah should be our motivator. We forgive because He loves it. We forgive because He rewards for it. We forgive because it's the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We forgive because it's the way of the family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We forgive because it's the path of ihsan. It's the path of mahabba. And I want to take a path to God. If I want to claim my haqq in this life, it doesn't mean you can't do it. But that reward that you would have otherwise gotten because you forgave may not be something that you end up getting to enjoy. So centering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as our main motivation. There's always going to be waswas when a person wants to take the higher road. Again, and those voices can come from within yourself, it can come from shaitan, it can come from the society around you. So like holding onto his rope and saying, like really rooting the intention of this is for God and God alone. This is because this is what Allah loves. And if I do what Allah loves, He will keep me safe and He will protect me. Now, when we do this, it's also important that we know that like part of this, removing this animosity or malice or grudge or whatever from the heart, it's hard to just let it go as it is and to know that it's fully gone. So if you feel that bad thoughts and feelings are coming up again, you continue to let go. And every time it comes up until it no longer comes up anymore. I believe that dua is one of the most powerful ways of doing this, that the person feels what's there and a person turns to Allah, who is their center, right? Where they're centering their intention in, and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, please remove these bad feelings from my heart. Please forgive this person. Please accept the fact that I have forgiven them. I don't hold them accountable on my account. Then to go beyond that, because again, it's the path of mahabba. So forgiveness is a branch, but we're trying to get to actually mahabba. And mahabba is, oh Allah, grant them good in this life and the next. Oh Allah, grant them guidance, grant them, if even to make dua if they haven't apologized. Oh Allah, grant them tawbatan nasuha. Grant them the ability to repent sincerely to you, and for that repentance to be accepted, and for them to have to be guided in their life, and for them to have the best of this life and the best of the next life. That is healing for your own heart, and it helps to wash out and it like whatever else might be there that's lingering, and to continue to make this dua for those who you might find it hard to forgive. Now, having said this, sometimes people do a harm, and we ask for their forgiveness, and that's what we're supposed to do. Right? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would ask for the forgiveness of people, and he would do that. And then there are cases when Allah tells the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the Quran, whether you pray for their forgiveness or you don't pray for their forgiveness, I'm not going to forgive them. All right? So it doesn't mean that just because I forgave someone, then Allah has certainly forgiven them. Sometimes a person has done a wrong that is so great that no matter how much we make dua for their forgiveness, Allah will actually not forgive them. He is the one who says, no, they're not forgiven. And this is in Surah Al-Munafiqun, right? About the munafiqun, about the hypocrites. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَسْتَغْفَرْتَ لَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تَسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ لَنْ تَغْفِرَ اللَّهُ لَهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الْفَاسِقِينَ. It is the same, whether you pray for their forgiveness or not, Allah will not forgive them. Surely Allah does not guide the rebellious people. Right? So but what was the way of the Prophet? His heart is clear. If after that Allah chooses that no, they're going to have punishment with me on Yawm al-Qiyamah, then that's the prerogative of our Creator to do that to whomever He wills. He also says this in this is also mentioned in Surah At-Tawbah as it relates to those who rejected the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when he came to them with the message and they knew he was the Prophet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah At-Tawbah, ask forgiveness for them or do not ask for forgiveness for them. If you should ask forgiveness for them 70 times, never will Allah forgive them. That is because they disbelieved in Allah and His Messenger, and Allah does not guide the defiantly disobedient people. So there are cases of harm that are so great that no matter what we make dua for, Allah is going to punish these people. And we leave that to Allah. He's the most wise with what the consequence will be. But in my relationship with Him, I know that He loves it when I forgive. In my relationship with Him, He loves it when I pray to Him for the forgiveness of others. Then that's for me. The other situation that is related to this is when we want to forgive, to develop boundaries. So sometimes you forgive because it was something small and a mistake on someone's part. It's not a usual pattern or whatever it is, and they just are having a bad day. Things go back to the way it was before. Other times it's like, no, there's a pattern of behavior. It's not getting fixed. You try to ask them to stop and they don't. So now the relationship might change and you might have to develop boundaries. Like, I don't want this same thing to repeat. I want to continue the relationship, but I have terms. And that's a good thing to do because that actually helps. Sometimes people don't know how to respect boundaries unless someone sets it for them, and they might resist it in the beginning, but it's actually good for both people. And so creating boundaries in new terms for the relationship, and then forgiving and moving on. But those conditions and boundaries are those that protect you from getting harmed, but it also allows the relationship to continue. So you look to whatever that pattern is, you say, okay, what can I do that can stop that from happening again? You set up those terms, and that becomes the basis by which a relationship can then move on. And we have, in Islam, we have mediation. We have this idea that even in marriages, if there's something that's, a dead end that people keep hitting in a married couple, they can have a representative from the woman's family and a representative from the man's family, and they discuss, the husband and wife's family, they discuss what the terms are, and they agree to something that is going to be agreeable to both sides, and they set new terms for the relationship. And I think it's also, there's a wisdom in the fact that it's not necessarily the two fighting with each other directly, but that there's representatives that are involved in the mediation. There's other parties and witnesses involved. And alhamdulillah, I think we also have institutions now in the Muslim community that do mediation between spouses. I believe Khalil Center does it, and also there's another organization, the name is escaping me, that it's, I can probably send it to Celebrate Mercy later on if interested. There's one that was founded in Dallas, Texas, I believe, that's also, that does Islamic marriage mediation. But part of that is setting terms. Where do we find that? In the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the famous story in Bukhari, where Wahshi, he hears that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is forgiving the people, and he's showing mercy and compassion to the people who are becoming Muslim in Mecca, and he becomes Muslim in Mecca, and he's hoping that he can also be from the people that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ forgives. So he goes to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and he says, when he saw me, this is in Bukhari, he said, "Are you Wahshi?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Was it you who killed Hamza?" I replied, "What happened is what you have been told of," right? Because he had actually described the details of the murder to other companions previously. So I went out, or the killing on the battlefield, I should say. So I went out when Allah's Messenger ﷺ died, and meaning he went out of the city. And then he says, and Musaylama al-Kadhab appeared, claiming to be a prophet. So when the story is, when Wahshi faces the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the account of how he killed Hamza, the Prophet's uncle, is mentioned to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he forgives him. And he just says, but he says something very interesting. He says, "Can you hide your face from me?" Right? "Can you hide your face from me?" Now, the Prophet is the most magnanimous, he's the most merciful, but why is he saying, but can you hide your face from me? Meaning, yes, I accept you and I forgive you. But there was, in that incident with Wahshi, there's still pain and hurt. So when you look, sometimes the person is completely forgiven in your heart, but when you see them, the trauma of what actually took place, and that is a trauma, to see the mutilated body of your uncle like that on the battlefield, that comes fresh back into your mind and back into your heart. So when he's saying, "Can you hide your face from me?" It's like, okay, if you forgive someone, but you still feel pain at the mention of their name, or at the seeing them somewhere, that doesn't mean you haven't forgiven them. That just means you still have pain from an actually traumatic event. And so when he says, "Can you hide your face from me?" Wahshi said he would always hide his face, and he tried to avoid the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And then after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ passed away, he, in trying to make up for the harm that he had caused the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in that time, before he was even Muslim, he was the one who actually killed Musaylama al-Kadhab, the false prophet who came after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and who was wreaking havoc in the Muslim community at that time. So, he sought to redeem himself, but out of respect for the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he would try to hide himself if he was ever in the gathering, out of just consideration of the fact that this thing, when he sees me, it makes a pain alive in his heart. So sometimes when people need distance, it's not because they haven't forgiven, it's because there's still pain associated with seeing that person that's really hard to bear. And so that's not the same as the heart having not forgiven. That's just pain. And it takes time to heal from really traumatic pain, and that's normal. The fourth issue that comes up is accountability, right? And so in the famous hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that the believer should never be stung from the same hole twice, the actual context in the commentary, Imam Nawawi mentions it. He says the reason behind narrating the hadith is that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ captured Abu Azza, a poet, on the day of Badr. He released him. So the Abu Azza actually told him, forgive me, I won't do this again. I was in the wrong. I'm not going to harm you guys. So he released him and made him promise not to fight or censure the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ again. He makes this promise. He releases him until he joined its people, then started over when he went back to his people by censuring and attacking. And then he was captured again in the Battle of Uhud. Okay, so he asked the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to release him again based on the same promise. And that's when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, a believer should not be stung from the same hole twice. And he actually is punished. He was one of the people that was killed after Uhud in that battle. So that's a heavy level of accountability, public accountability. And there is to know when is the time for private accountability versus public accountability for someone who is going to cause massive harm to others. That's going to need fiqh and fatwa, right? It's not something that like there's a one sentence line. Now we know that we have the hudud. We have the hudud in Islamic law. We have crimes that are punishable by death. We have crimes that are punishable by other punishments as well. And so it does, there is harm that accountability takes place with and justice takes place with. And so our Sharia does not contradict like mercy and forgiveness. But how do we reconcile it? Let's say someone is actually being held accountable, right? And it's from the hudud. It's at this level where this person is going to receive the death penalty. Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, he said some beautiful words. He said that if I had to carry out the hudud myself on someone, if I was the one that's responsible for taking the life, right, of someone else, because this is the head that they have earned themselves, he said, my heart would still be watchful over having over having mahabba and love for this person and compassion for this person. So this person's gonna receive the highest level of the law, right, the death penalty. But the person who's carrying it out is not doing it like, I hate you, this is revenge, this is, you got what you deserved, you're gonna, it's not with us from a state of malice or hatred. It's still in a state of love. The heart, he's saying, would still, the heart is clear towards that person. And one of the ways that it can be clear towards people when a person has received worldly accountability is that may Allah allow them, if they receive the accountability in this life, not to get the accountability in the next life, right? That they have paid the price of their wrongdoing now, and in the next life they're forgiven. And it's better for us. It's a mercy from Allah when that happens to us in this life than when if it were to happen in the hereafter. So accountability and mahabba are not contradictions, but to be able to hold them together is not an easy thing to do. And then the last step, I think, which is also really important in terms of reflection, is how do I learn about myself from this? And this was a beautiful gem that Dr. Maryam Shaybani shared. Again, I really encourage those who are interested in more of a very nice scholarly nuanced discussion on this subject to subscribe to Dr. Maryam Shaybani's website. Like she has classes for women right now that you can, by subscribing to it, you can take the class and you can benefit from it. So she mentions, how do I learn, or how do we learn about ourselves from this? How do we grow from what has happened? And there are questions that we can ask ourselves, like, have I done this to other people? Right? This thing that I'm having a hard time to forgive, am I like that sometimes? And even if I'm not like that 100%, am I like that 10%? Am I like that 5%? Like, what part of this ugliness that I'm having a hard time with have I done to others? And if I have, can I go and apologize to them? Can I go and make amends with them? If I'm having a hard time making amends for doing the exact same thing that someone else is doing to me, then that's an indication of something that needs to be cleansed from myself, and I need to start with myself first in that path of rectification. Also, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaching me in this moment? There's so many lessons that happen from hard situations. Hard situations require us to practice patience. Maybe we thought we had a lot more patience than we thought we did, and then we react in a way that we realize I'm not very patient. I'm not as patient as I thought I was, and it's humbling in that way. So what is Allah teaching me about me? And also, what is Allah teaching me about Himself? Now, again, comparing the reception of the tawbah of a believer and how Allah loves that tawbah to how we receive apology from others. When a believer makes tawbah and returns to Allah and asks for His forgiveness over something, then it's described to us as the man who is traveling by himself in the desert, and he has his animal with all of his supplies, and he goes and he takes a nap under a tree, and when he wakes up, his animal and all of his supplies are gone, and he goes searching around trying to find his animal and supplies, because if he doesn't find it, he's going to die in the desert. And he looks and he looks and he looks and he doesn't find it. Finally, out of pure exhaustion in the desert, he goes back and goes to sleep again. Then he wakes up from his sleep and he sees his animal there with all of his supplies staring him in the face. And out of pure joy and pure ecstasy and happiness, he says, "Oh Allah, I am your Lord and you are my slave." By accident, because he's so happy he doesn't know what's coming out of his mouth. And then the Prophet Muhammad tells us that Allah, that He is more pleased with the tawbah of the believer than the man was in that moment when he said those words. That's how Allah receives our tawbah. So don't we want to receive apology from others in that big way? Like, don't we want to do that too? You know, and to be welcoming and to be magnanimous and to help people get back up and to help people set things right. You know, this idea, don't help the shaitan against your brother. Don't kick them when they're down, when they're trying to get back, they're trying to find their way again. Don't say another stinging word that makes them feel like there's no hope for them to get better. So this is, you know, this magnanimity is really needed. And many times I have found that people who cannot do this with others, it's because they don't do it with themselves. They haven't forgiven themselves. They beat themselves up to a pulp when they make mistakes. So that's why they're so hard-hearted with themselves that they end up also being hard-hearted with everyone else. And you know, once a person's able to actually forgive themselves, and forgive themselves not again a spiritual bypassing way, which is, oh, it's okay, but like, no, really feel what you did wrong, really feel the mistake, really feel the shortcoming, and then say, yes, I'm human and I made that mistake and I feel terrible about it and I regret it, and I turn to Allah for forgiveness and I seek His forgiveness and mercy, and I'm going to try again. I'm going to try to be better. But you have to feel it all, right? You can't bypass the emotional aspect. You have to feel what's there, and in the middle of feeling that, and it's not an easy thing to feel, to still turn back to Allah with hope and to see His mercy and His greatness and His ability to transform you as bigger than your mistakes and your shortcomings and all of the issues you might have. So practicing the mercy with yourself, and then once you can do that, and it helps you with tawbah and it helps you with humility, it helps you to not be arrogant, then you can do that with others as well, and you can receive them in that way, and you can apologize to them if you need to in that way. And it's rooted in mahabba. So you practice some love upon yourself by forgiving yourself. Now you're going to practice some love with your brother and sister by loving them too. So what is Allah teaching me about myself? What is Allah teaching me about the world? What is He teaching me about others? Also, in terms of when something we're suffering from it a lot more than what would be normal for people to suffer, right? Because two people can go through the same event in life, and one person goes through that difficult event and they take it in stride and they get back up and they're doing well, and someone else takes it and it just wipes them out and they can't get past it. We often say this, that there's a difference between pain and suffering is sometimes something that we are elongating ourselves out of the pain. All right, like no one else is doing it to us, where we've removed ourselves from a harmful situation. We're not in that situation anymore. Allah has protected us from being in that situation, and now after being removed from that situation and we're, alhamdulillah, in a safe place, the person will continue to suffer outside of that situation. And so the question is, like, what spiritual purification is needed? Like, what is going on? Many times there's an attachment that's a very unhealthy attachment, an expectation or even an entitlement that's actually not sound. And that needs to be removed. And I think Ustadha Yasmin Mujahid, she has, this is something I really love that she talks about a lot is about loving anything in creation in the way that you should only love Allah, right? Being attached to anything in creation in a way that you should only be attached to with Allah. And that we find our ultimate comfort in sakina and tranquility and peace of mind and wealth of heart in the relationship we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no one else gets there. No, others we love for Him, right? We love people for the sake of Allah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate love. And that being our main anchor is really important in how to weather storms, because if we are connected to Him in a healthy way, right? What did the Prophet Muhammad say after Ta'if? As long as you are not angry with me, then I don't care. As long as you, Ya Allah, if I'm going through all of this pain, he's exhausted, he's suffered a lot at this point at the hands of the people. He's lost his wife, Sayyidah Khadija, he's lost his uncle, he's been stoned out of the city of Ta'if. And again, in that moment, he didn't punish them. He thought about something higher, which was maybe from their descendants would become Muslim. And subhanAllah, how Isra and Mi'raj, the great opening comes to him after he practices a magnanimous act of forgiveness in which he had every right to have these people crushed. And he had the capacity and the ability to do it. But because of the ihsan of that moment, the ihsan of maybe there's going to be people in the future from their descendants who would believe, right? And forgiving them for that reason, or letting them not be punished for that reason. And then turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his pain, seeking his help from Him, right? That's when the great opening of Isra and Mi'raj. And he comes back from that never the same, right? Because لَيْسَ الْخَبَرُ كَالْمُعَايَنَةِ. A report of something is not the same as seeing it with your own eyes. He saw things with his own eyes. He experienced things directly that, we have ayat about in the Quran. The Prophet Muhammad saw them, experienced them directly. And so many times a magnanimous act of forgiveness is the door to a great opening from Allah, many gifts from Allah. And, again, if the intention is Allah, and He says, as long as you are not mad at me, Ya Allah, I don't care. Meaning the world is going to be the world. The suffering and the pain of this world is going to be what it is. But I just want to make sure it's not a sign of your anger with me. And subhanAllah, he turns to Allah. That's his primary focus. That's his primary intention and focus is, am I doing that which is pleasing to God? Am I carrying the prophecy the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants? And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to be a people who aspire to forgiveness and aspire to mercy and aspire to getting there. If we're not there today, to make the dua, oh Allah, get me there. Every day I'm going to try. And every day if I feel like I'm falling short, I'm going to ask you to help me to get there tomorrow. But it's not something that we put to the side. Let us not be a people who say, I'm going to hold this over that person's head until the Yawm al-Qiyamah. May Allah hold nothing over our heads from others until the Yawm al-Qiyamah. We would never want that. But rather we want to be a people who insha'Allah can do the best, because our intention and our focus and our hearts are connected to Him. And whatever I said that's beneficial is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and whatever is wrong and mistaken is from myself and shaitan. Barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum.